Ben, I'm going to take that as a cue.
Cool. Good. Thanks, Brad. Welcome, everyone. My name is Ben Wallace. I'm president of Building Intelligence Group at the national level, and we have several springing up around the country, which we'll get into in a second. I am in the Twin Cities with the original chapter, Building Intelligence Group Twin Cities. Before we roll into the presentations and discussion, we're going to do a few updates, but first I need to share our antitrust agreement for Building Intelligence Group. Big participants must operate under antitrust compliance and will not engage in any activities that could result in any anti-competitive activities. Antitrust violations, these are agreements that always or almost always restrict competition and reduce output. Examples are price fixing, market allocation, bid rigging, and others. So just want everyone to keep that in mind, because this is really meant to be an open, transparent, sharing environment. Started organically with local startups, and that's a big part of what BIG's all about, with local chapter networking, get-togethers, and just kind of taking off your company representation hats at times to just share and raise the waters for everyone else around smart connected buildings and applications. So thank you everyone for joining us. This is one of our quarterly virtual events, which we hold on a national level. Today's topic is on intelligent hospitals. And we have one coming up in August on intelligent commercial real estate. So we'll be sharing more on that in the future. We've had a lot of development for the organization from the executive committee, branching out with Ben Disney appointed as our chapter liaison, helping to formulate chapters. We've had several sessions for founding members, people who are just interested in starting up chapters locally, and pulling those folks together, equipping them with some of the resources Building Intelligence Group offers. So we'd like to help anyone in any geography that's interested in starting that up, and you can find information on the website. We'll get into a couple of those updates with specific chapters in a second. Also, we've been doing some work to change over our event hosting. We appreciate all your accommodation as we shift onto a new platform for both sending out emails and hosting events. So I think because you're here, you probably received the email or saw the social posts and were able to register, but appreciate any feedback that you have on that process as we move forward. We're just trying to streamline things and get our infrastructure and tool set in place so that we can scale and also do that on a local basis with the chapters. So we've our programming and events are a big part, in addition to the local chapter organizations getting together. The programming committee works on development for these quarterly national programs, as well as on local chapter development. The marketing and membership committee has been working to build out the website capabilities, accommodate chapters. I'm happy to say that we now have our membership transaction capabilities live on the site. So if you have not yet done so, please visit buildingintelligencegroup.org and submit your membership application. It's just a $50 fee. So we try to make it accessible and easy for folks to join and be part of at the national level through that. And we'll be launching a more widespread membership campaign in the future, but we encourage you to go ahead and become a dues paying member through the site now that we have that enabled. We are also working on sponsorship packages, and we'll have those published shortly, though I guess if you or someone in your organization might be willing to step forward and support Building Intelligence Group and gain some visibility and throughout our communications in the process, we'd love to have you as a financially supporting sponsor of the organization. So you can also find information on the website under sponsorship. I mentioned the chapters are formulating around the country. We've got, and we're happy to say that there's actual in real life IRL events happening where people are getting back together. In the Twin Cities at Big TC, we've got an event coming up on June 22nd at 4 o'clock, hosted by 75F. And they just announced that they're hiring a bartender for it. So they're getting serious about the networking and ability to focus there. So anyone in the Twin Cities area or who wants to trek here, feel free to join us on the 22nd. Big Chicago has an event coming up at DLR on the 30th of June. So you can, we posted a little bit of info on that at the website, but contact the local reps or just submit an inquiry through the website if you're looking to get on the list for Chicago, and just indicate that. The Austin, Texas chapter has had some formulation events and had an event on the 12th of May and has a happy hour coming up on June 3rd at Easy Tiger North location. So anyone in the Austin area, or even if you know folks who might be interested in these events on a local basis, please share Building Intelligence Group info with them, and we'll try to get the announcements out to you. There's a lot of good activity formulating in Atlanta, So Be It chapter, as well as in Detroit coming together. So those are just a few highlights. Brad and Ben Disney, feel free to chime in if there's anything I missed, or Zach. But that kind of wraps up what I have as updates. I appreciate everyone joining us for the event today, and we'll let it roll forward. Thank you.
Robbie, you want to kick us off with intros for the presentation? I will share my screen here, so make sure everyone can see it.
Sure. So we have three presenters today. We have Eric Abbott, who is the Chief Product Officer of Analytics for Medicine. Analytics for Medicine is a startup focusing on AI-driven clinical management of hypertension. Previously, he was the Systems Director, Strategic Partnerships, Innovation, and Patient Experience at Advocate Aurora Health, an integrated healthcare delivery network serving Wisconsin and Northern Illinois. There, he led a corporate practice to digitally transform and improve care across the organization. Prior to this, Mr. Abbott led product management and strategic business development initiatives at various high technology companies focused on the healthcare, public safety, and commercial enterprise markets. He also teaches consumer digital health and American healthcare systems graduate courses in the Masters of Health Informatics program offered by Northwestern University. So welcome, Eric.
Thank you.
Our next presenter is Brad Colt, an intelligent building strategist at HGA. Skilled in communicating technical concepts to technical and non-technical audiences alike, Brad helps clients navigate the ever-changing technology landscape to select flexible, scalable solutions that adapt to present and future needs. Brad believes buildings should respond to the occupants and that technology must enable productivity without being a focal point. With a background in low voltage systems, including audio, video, building automation systems, and security and telecommunications, he is experienced in all phases of construction projects, including design and production of construction documents, budget estimation and review, construction administration, and systems commissioning. So welcome, Brad. And our third presenter is Michael McMahon. Michael is a senior associate, intelligent buildings with Newcomb & Boyd. As an information technology leader, Mike has more than 18 years of experience pioneering and managing complex IT solutions. Through a history of collaboration with Fortune 500 companies, he is accomplished in providing technology-focused solution consulting, training, strategic fiscal planning, and implementation programming. Welcome, Mike.
Rob, you want to kind of lay down the ground rules as we're going to go through this and have some of the chat conversation going on?
Sure. So as our presenters are going through some of the items they've prepared, we do have the chat available. So it's kind of like a dual program happening. There's the presentation that's happening, chat that happens in the chat. And we will kind of incorporate the comments and questions that are being thrown into the chat with the presentation and talking points that our presenters have brought. So our goal is to be collaborative, open. It's not meant to be a presentation. It's really meant to be interactive and just a really great learning environment for everyone that's here. So we appreciate the expertise that our presenters have brought. And we also appreciate the expertise that the rest of the audience brings to the conversation, and really believe that holistically, that's where we gain the value in the programming.
Thanks, Eric. You want to take it away?
Absolutely. So again, pleasure to be here and welcome to all. I think one of the things that's very important, really building on the heritage that I had working with Brad and his team at HGA, was a wonderful opportunity to curate what does that hospital of the future look like. Bearing in mind at the healthcare system that I was at, really focusing on three areas. How do we create exceptional patient experiences? How do we drive clinically relevant efficiencies as it pertains to clinical effectiveness? And this is important, especially with providers today, the operational efficiencies piece. So the building itself becomes, if you will, an opportunity to really bring forward in a transparent way a lot of technologies. And so with the digital transformation initiatives that are very broad based today in healthcare, we wanted to see that facility as really a beacon as it pertains to those three core areas I mentioned, particularly around access and utilization, and doing that in a safe and effective manner. So I'm going to take everyone through, if we go to the next slide, please, how we achieve that with HGA. And I think one of the key things to keep in mind in terms of setting the stage are the five, what they call the quintuple aims from the National Institutes of Health. And so I won't read them all because you can see them to your right there, but one of the more recent ones is equity and inclusion. So being able to draw in those population groups that may eschew healthcare services. So how do you create a welcome and inviting environment? An example of this that we did with HGA, for instance, was looking at the use of digital check-in processes and what that infrastructure might look like, particularly around language interpretation. Bless you. Focusing on this, if we go to the next slide, please. The approach that we had to take was really anchored in four axioms or rules. The first being, what are those improvements that we want to make relative to existing care pathways? And this involved discussions that we had with multiple stakeholders. And this is important because some of those conceptual what-if scenarios that we were exploring, those need to be brought back to the architectural firm so they can be captured in the drawings, because that matters. The other thing is, does what we do add value? And bearing in mind that in healthcare, just like in hospitality, just like in sports and entertainment, it's very, very crucial that what we're doing is meaningful. And it has to align to the strategic goals of the organization. The second domain is the business case. And this is something where at a not-for-profit, we have to prioritize what those investments might be. And that starts with, where does technology make an impact? That percolates back down to HGA and an architectural firm in the sense of the prioritization. So an example might be, for instance, we can't do everything that we want to do. However, we can plan for the future in terms of allocating resources or infrastructure to support certain modalities in the future. Cabling is a great example of that, or wireless infrastructure. Another example is, what are those objective key results that we're trying to achieve? For an architectural firm, for myself in an innovation perspective, it's being able to look at a way to have extensibility and scalability at that facility as technology changes, and technology will change, as we've all learned. The third is process orientation. So as we do that selection process, there's many, many different opportunities to select that technology, and those have dependencies. And those dependencies can sometimes create swirl for an architectural firm in terms of where to invest. The last is change management. And this is probably the most important. How do we deploy the technology and support the technology? And by or bringing that into the at the beginning in an agile fashion, what that looks like, that is something that's very, very important, particularly with respect to creating usefulness to drive adoption. If we can go to the next slide, please. So what does this look like? We broke it down into three main areas: what we could commit to, what we were planning, and what those candidates would look like. Next slide, please. So, I mentioned that we're trying to solve problems, but we knew we had certain technologies that we wanted to consider as a benchmark. I won't read through all of these, but one example I think that's very important for this audience and some of the audience members at the beginning here, we look at mobile edge computing, connectivity. How do we bring the cloud back into the healthcare system? A great example of this is private 5G, as well as the synthesis of 5G with IoT and Wi-Fi. And so adding on to that, the compute capability in an experiential manner. So for instance, being able to do mixed reality for a surgeon while bringing in virtually a patient's family and the patient in the room together is a good example of this, where the compute resources, if you will, are not necessarily on-prem, but we have that horsepower. For HGA and an architectural firm, what it means is making sure that we have a big enough pipe that we've designed for wireless infrastructure and designed for the growth. Next slide, please. So one of the key areas that I pursued, and this is something that a lot of healthcare providers are now waking up to in terms of the potential opportunity, is contextual care, otherwise known as location-based services. And there's so many different use cases here that are relevant. I won't read through all of them, but I think two of them that I will touch upon, the first being the clinical workflows. In an ED setting where you have a lot of chaos at times, it's a very high variability environment. Understanding how people are moving, understanding where people are at the time that they are, including staff, patrons, family, and so forth, is vital. So you want to have a cockpit control tower perspective of what's going on. What this means from an architectural standpoint is being able to use technology to understand with respect to proximity, with respect to different endpoint devices, how everything is flowing together. And so this means incorporating that, whether it be a BLE infrastructure, Wi-Fi infrastructure, even 5G infrastructure, into those design considerations and what that power looks like, what the signaling pathways, and so forth. A final example here that I'll present would be self-rooming and wayfinding. In an analogous fashion, how do you make it easy for patients to check in digitally, find themselves through the labyrinth of the facility? And so that brings me to two select use cases. Again, the digital wayfinding and self-rooming, a vital one as it pertains to the patient experience, but also clinician satisfaction. How do we make it easy on physicians, nurses to know that the patients arrive so they can get things ready? Automation plays a big role here, particularly around sustainability, bringing the room to the desired temperature or the preferences of that patient if they're coming back, those sort of considerations. The second facet is smart rooms. And this is the integration of disparate digital technologies together to create a cohesive experience for the patient, avoid nursing distractions, and so on. And again, this is an area from an architectural standpoint, it's exceptionally important to understand where these endpoints are going to be located, what the infrastructure is to connect them together, and to support and sustain them. So thank you very much. And with that, turn it over to Brad.
All right, thanks a lot, Eric. And so as we worked on a couple of hospital projects with Eric, and his team, and his former employer, he's focused on operations, and that IT department is working on continuous improvements. And we come in then with a construction project, and what I'm going to focus on is what our process is for plugging in with that team and with the rest of the stakeholders that are going to be needed to deliver the intelligent hospital. And I'm approaching this from the perspective of new construction. It's going to be different if we're talking about building that's already built and coming in and trying to retrofit or overlay an intelligent building on top of that. But this is our process we went through, and we began by taking that input and understanding, they have their program, and then also going, all right, from the building's perspective, these are all the things we're going to be bringing to the table that are your building systems. We want to help you maximize that capital investment that you're making by looking at how are we taking these things you're going to put in and think a little bit differently about them, being able to tear down those silos between these different systems and share data between them so that they're able to automate or generate intelligence for the people who are using them to simplify their lives and make a better environment for all the people who are occupying that building. So this is where we start. We throw this on the table, begin with the art of possible, and we start working around some of these concepts. And as we talk through things and understand what the needs are, we generate more and more things that could be possible. So it's an ever evolving, nonstop growing process here. And it takes a lot of people. I like to say it takes a village to be able to pull all this together. So we're bringing in people from the hospital team and trying to bring in the project leadership in the hospital, the administrators and president of the hospital, a lot of people at that high level talking about business side of things. We engage that nursing and clinical team, IT and Eric's innovation team. We're talking to facilities, security, really all the people who are going to have any kind of a touch on the different systems that are in the building. And we've got a lot of different people on the design side as well, the architects, the engineers, lighting designers, and low voltage, who are all going to have a part to play in this. We've delivered some of these projects as IPD and some of them as design assist. So we've got all the different trade partners there who all need to get on the same page in order to be able to deliver. And in the case of these Advocate Aurora projects, we had a MSI, or a multi-systems integrator, that we brought on as an early trade partner. And so there's definitely room for some debate there about whether they should be a part of the construction team hired by the general contractor, or whether they're better off being hired direct to the owner. It needs to be an ongoing relationship between the owner and the MSI, something that's going to continue to be in place even after the project is turned over and long after we're done with that design phase. So it's important to be able to have that relationship. And so there's some of the pros to being able to go direct to the owner on that. We chose to bring them in under the general contractor using a Division 25 procurement method. And we wanted to do that because we thought that it was important to bring them on early, first of all, so that they have a say in what we're going to be designing and able to give some input. We wanted them to be able to have a little bit of overview over what's happening with the mechanical, the electrical, all the different technologies as we're selecting systems and thinking about system architectures and how are things going to communicate, making sure that we didn't end up getting to the end of a project with products and equipment and technologies that we're never going to be able to talk to each other to be able to achieve some of the outcomes that we wanted to. So it's important for us to bring them on early and to give them some purview over those other general contractor subs, and so that they could help shape the best system that we could have and try and find the best cost efficiency as we're delivering an IPD method and doing constant cost estimating, keeping us on track. I think it's an important piece to note because there aren't a lot of people who estimate the multi-system integrator scope very well, because it's a lot of labor. So we want to be able to have somebody there who could help with that continuous cost estimating. And additionally, they are able to go out and test things that, as the consultant, I don't have a lab to be able to plug all these things in, and nor do I have the time to do all of that. We want to be innovative. We want to be able to push the envelope on projects. And the way I tell our clients, we're only able to give you what we were able to do on the last project and be able to say, yeah, it's definitely going to work. We know that when you see things on paper, it doesn't always align the way you expect it to in the real world. So bringing on that MSI early helps us to be able to validate some of the more advanced systems that we're talking about integrating and concepts we want to try and deliver. So I think there's a good case for bringing them on early, whether they are under the general contractor or whether they're hired direct to the owner. So as we started to engage all those stakeholders across each of these different teams, we asked the question, what makes business sense? Because we aren't just trying to solve the problems of the facilities department or trying to help the IT department like we might be thinking about when we're working in our silos as we're designing the infrastructure for cabling or as we're trying to put the HVAC and controls in. We really need this to be bridging all of the different departments that are in our clients' organization and focusing on business outcomes, not just on operations and solving some of those point solution problems. So the way we do that is we start off with a visioning session during our kickoff meeting, where we work with Eric and his team and all these other folks to understand what is it that you guys are working on? What is your current state? How do you currently operate? You guys have a roadmap. Let's help us understand what that ideal future state looks like. And that's a co-creation process where we're feeding our ideas in, they're giving us their ideas, and everybody's coming up with something that's even better than when we had started. And so knowing where you're at and where you want to go helps us to be able to build this roadmap. And I've never seen a project where they're able to fund everything they want to do. So what we've done is as we start to prioritize the different use cases that they're going to be implementing, we're able to put together the roadmap for these are the future things that you should be planning to do. And as we're selecting the technologies and selecting cabling, making sure we have the right conduits in the wall and the right endpoints where we need them for future devices, that now we're setting up this client for success with having the bones and that backbone in place for where they're headed. Another part of this visioning session, we walk through this keep, stop, start process. So what are the things you're doing right now that you want to make sure you're carrying forward? What are some of those processes that aren't working for you, or as you're evolving, you're going to try and just leave behind? And what things aren't you doing right now that you know you're going to need to pick up? So there's a lot of change management as we're talking through any of these discussions. And the last part of this visioning session tends to be a long session as we get everybody together and spending 2 hours talking through all these things. And we spend a lot of time focusing on use cases. So what are some of the new ways you could be operating your building and new insights it could be generating for you that we may not have been thinking about before? We try and put those all on the table. And at the beginning, it's just to understand what things are of interest, just kind of yay or nay. We're using that lens of the business case for where we want to be prioritizing our efforts as we explore what it is that we're going to do to make your building more intelligent. So after we've had that initial kickoff, we have some idea of what things that are interesting to each of our particular clients. We move into a goals and KPIs assessment. So for our Advocate Aurora projects, we started with looking at what the guiding principles were for the project. And we use that as our North Star. And we put everything through that lens of how do these things relate to these goals. I summarized our goals. We had a long list of them that you can see on the left. It's a little bit of an eye chart, not intended to read them all, but it really all kind of fell into the categories of patient satisfaction, which most of the healthcare clients I'm working with will put that at the very top of their list, followed by safety and security of all the occupants in the building. And that's going to be the staff and the physicians, the patients, their family, the guests, along with patient satisfaction. We want to make sure that we're considering guests and family as well. And then physicians and staff satisfaction is something that's even more important now as we're hearing about cases of burnout amongst all these people who have been working so hard for these past several years. And it's always been an issue even more now. So how do we make their lives easier? And some of that comes through labor automation, taking a lot of tasks that are done manually right now and asking the question, okay, what can we use some of the data we have and some of the technology to be able to help make manual processes more automated? So as we assemble this list of goals and the outcomes we want to be able to have for the project, we start then going through and assigning KPIs. And that's another very collaborative process where we want to make sure that those key performance indicators are things that we can be measuring. We can tie some metrics to them. And in some cases, they're things we'll be able to see through the systems that we're installing. In other cases, they're things that are going to be delivered through surveys and other reporting tools that administrators and clinicians are going to have as they're working through the operations of their buildings. So it's a very cross-functional process up to this point. We really need to make sure we're aligning the goals across each of these different groups. And something that's unique when we're trying to talk about integrating many different systems and processes that when we're used to kind of working our traditional silos, we don't always have to take that into account. And again, it's worth mentioning, I see a lot of the clients we work with, they work in silos. So getting back to that change management concept, we've got to talk about, what's the benefit for the greatest good, and then how are you going to operationalize this in a way that now you're going to be thinking a little bit differently from the, I just work over here in my cubicle in this department, and I don't really reach out unless I, need IT to be able to make sure that I got my email working. So getting people to think a little more about how all this stuff comes together. But at this stage, after we've gone through that initial cross-functional piece of it, we do break off into the individual user groups. I call them personas, right? So IT being their persona, and facilities, security, clinical, administrative, and we start to get a little bit of a understanding from each of them of what would they individually prioritize, the different use cases that we've come up with. And so that helps us to understand. People can speak a little more freely when they're not in this committee with all of their other peers. Understand what goals these individual groups have, and then we correlate all of that. To kind of help to score. What's the overall group think in terms of this being a high priority, low priority, medium priority? However we decide to score them, and then what do those individual departments feel? So we kind of weight that average using both of those inputs, and then we start to really figure out what are the technical solutions that are going to be able to achieve the outcomes that we've set up and put some costs to those. So now that we've got costs going along with these use cases and each of the different groups, we've got a cross-functional priority, we've got individual department priorities. We take that, correlate that with costs, and come back to looking at that list again and really make some detailed refinements to what things we want to say are above the line that are going to go into the project based on what budget had been set aside, and what things are going to go on that future roadmap. I think maybe it's worth mentioning here that the projects we were working on, this is where I see the most opportunities for success working with clients, is where they come to us and they say, we have a budget for innovation. We don't necessarily know what it's going to be for, but we've set aside some protected money. We're able to do something, because many intelligent building projects end up getting sidelined or backburnered because they'd like to do all kinds of cool stuff, but nobody's budgeted for this because this is stuff that's going to be new scope. So it's important to have that. And I think it's also important to have that client who already has that vision. We need a champion who can come in and say, I see the direction these things need to go. I don't necessarily know how to get there. That's why they want to work with someone like us to help them figure out what that roadmap looks like. But having someone who knows to ask the right questions to put the stuff into the project helps get some of this funding. So I just want to give a few examples here of some of the use cases. Eric touched on some of them earlier with self-rooming and the smart patient room. Some of the things that come out of being able to tie the simple things together: shades, temperature control, lighting, TV. These are all things that you can get some of that functionality through a pillow speaker. But if anybody's been in the hospital or familiar with what that technology is, it's pretty limiting in terms of what you can put on just a very few number of buttons. So we're seeing more of a push to put a screen in the room or allow patients to log in with their BYOD device and be able to take more control over the room. So being able to operate the shades and pick exactly what level you want them to be, rather than just push the button for up or down. Being able to control all the zones of lighting rather than just that one light that's over your patient bed. Being able to do dimming or color tuning if we have white light color tuning or RGB color tuning. And being able to actually see what temperature the room is at, get feedback on it, right? I can push this button up or down. I don't really know, is that anything actually going through? When you're able to look at that on a screen, you can see what is the temperature set to, and you can see that it's made the adjustment when you move a slider. And you've got all these things that are talking to each other. Now that we've got this baseline integration, the rest of what you want to do with it is just programming. So one of the things that we had explored was a patient welcome experience, where we have the room that's tied into the medical records, which has scheduling on it. So talking to the admissions transfer discharge server can tell us that there is going to be a patient in the room at 3 o'clock today, and they can get this room all set up, have the lights turned on, have it set to the right temperature, open up the shades, and have that footwall screen displaying a welcome message. Say, welcome so-and-so. It's This could be your care team for the day. And when here's your schedule, right? When you're ready, go ahead and play the welcome video. And that system's able to log that they've watched that welcome video for compliance, and you have a lot of things that could come through that portal. The other things now, once we have all this stuff tied in the room, put it into the labor automation category, some of this could go under safety and security as well. Being able to automate that code blue response. So this isn't something that I invented, but this is something that I've seen other people do. And as we've talked with clients, they think this is something that's helpful. So being able to have access to the nurse call system to know when somebody has pushed a code blue, you've got a bunch of people who are rushing into the room trying to save this person's life. And when that happens, you don't want the distraction of having the TV on in the background. So let's shut that off, right? Let's go ahead and give some natural light in the room if it's daytime, or close the windows if it's nighttime, so the people outside don't have to see any of the craziness that's going on inside. And we, got a lot of people who are going to be running around here. Let's go ahead and just pump a little bit of cold air in the room. Just drop that set point a little bit. Turn all the lights up. So things that you don't want the people who are fundamentally, there to be able to serve that patient, trying to save a life. You don't want them to have to be distracted by those things, and you don't want to, them to have to manually do these processes. So let's automate it. And taking that concept and applying it in another project that we did with Abbott Northwestern, we set up a epilepsy response, a very similar sort of thing, very similar sequence that happens after somebody pushes a button. And on that one, it was a sitter who would be watching and then manually pushing a button. But there are ways that you can do that if you're going to put a microphone in and using some of the audio analytics to be able to sense when that epileptic event is happening and be able to automatically trigger. The last thing here for labor automation, I had a bullet point, is just being able to take all the different systems you have, like lighting and security and building automation, things that get scheduled. You want to have a common schedule for all those things. So that's very typical. I keep seeing a lot of our clients in any market looking at trying to just put everything on one common schedule, so you don't have to go to 3 different systems to be able to make the same change when it's going to be not like a hospital shutting down for a snow day, but when you want to just make any of those kind of adjustments to normal operating hours, for instance. So we write our specs, we create our plans and our documents, we send those out to bid, and everything gets executed exactly the way we talked about during our planning phase, right? Well, of course not. I've never had any project that came back that had 0 change orders on it. And it's just the nature of the business. So, we run into challenges on this project just like any other. And we wanted to just kind of focus on a few of them. And thinking about, we all know that technology moves so fast, and over the last couple of years, we've really seen that feel like it accelerates. So as we were working through planning and we put out our design package, that's going to be another 18, 24 or more months of construction that's going to go on. And during that time, IT isn't just sitting idle. They're thinking about system-wide standards that they're updating. They're evaluating new technologies, and as well they should. But that means they're not aligned with the shop drawings that were approved, a year and a half, 2 years before any of that equipment's going in. So by the time we got to trying to implement some of these integrations and getting systems talking to each other, we found there were some things that just weren't in place anymore. It didn't implement one interface. It hadn't end up choosing the patient infotainment system that we thought we would use to be able to do the welcome sequence. So we've had to kind of sidestep a few things and come up with other ways of doing them. Some things had to be, I'm not going to say they're missed opportunities, but they're deferred opportunities, right? So down the road, when that client decides that they're going to implement some of the tools that would be fundamental to making some of these concepts happen, then you can go ahead and decide to plug them in. And the little chart on the side here shows that we need to try and figure out as much as we can up front, because that's where the ability to influence the success of the project costs us the least. But as time goes on, it just gets more and more costly. So this is a challenge. We've talked about a few ways that we could try and make that a little bit easier. It's always going to be something that's going to be a bit challenging. I've suggested we need to try to have a balance between what are we planning during these early stages and keeping some of that budget a little bit loose to be able to accommodate the shifting IT procurement schedules, as that is something that's inevitable. We need to be flexible to that and not fully commit our budgets up front and then not have anything for wiggle room as we're having to align things down the road. And there we go. That's my first bullet point: is keep that scope somewhat flexible. I also say, we're in a construction project, whether that's going to be bringing that MSI on under the trades or having the owner hire them, starting early. We really benefit from being able to get the big picture things figured out here, because we're kind of an overlay across all these other systems. It's hard enough designing all those other systems, but then coming in afterwards and trying to say, okay, now we want to do these other things. Oh, by the way, you got to redesign these things. That doesn't fly. So you want to take advantage of the most opportunity that's out there, you got to start early. And then trying to do whatever we can to align the owner expectations with our design schedule. A lot of clients may be the first time that they're building a building, so it's up to us as the consultants, as the advisors, to be educating them on what the process looks like. And so we've got to clearly articulate these last responsible moments to the client to let them know, these are some things we need to get in the walls. We have to make decisions on early. Some of the other endpoint technologies, as long as it meets some of these qualifications, you can go ahead and pick the latest, greatest product, and it won't really make a big difference once it gets plugged in the wall. And one of the things that Eric's team spearheaded was getting some pilot spaces set up, being able to test some of these untested concepts in a low risk mock-up. That's one of the things that's pretty important, is how do we de-risk? That's one of the things that leads to the investment, is making sure that we're not setting up a whole lot of risk and uncertainty for the contractors, and especially for that owner, as we're going in here to try and do things that are new and innovative. So that mock-up really ends up being very helpful. Mike, I think that transitions over to you.
All right, great, Brad. Thank you. And thank you all for sticking with us here as we go through our presentation on intelligent healthcare. What I'm going to focus on a little bit now is kind of a practical approach that we advise a lot of our clients in the space on how to transition to intelligent healthcare, because there's so many different facets to it, right? First and foremost is changing your mindset on how you procure and how you solution things. So evolving from silo solutioning, buy a feature today and use the feature tomorrow. So even if you don't plan on, to Brad's point, buying that TV system that was going to do all the other things that we had planned, buying something and procuring the base foundational components are probably the next most important thing that you can do. Because what we want to do is be able to expand and leverage all of those other things for all of your other initiatives. So strategic planning is very important to that, setting up a roadmap. So for instance, here in a typical siloed environment, everybody has HVAC. Hopefully you have a building automation system associated with it. And all that does is condition inside air. You have lighting control. With lighting control sensors, it controls your lights. And then if we were to take a look at what we see as what a lot of healthcare environments are starting to get interested in now, and they've been in the last year or so, are air quality, both indoor and outdoor air quality sensors, which detect air conditions. Those by themselves don't really do anything other than that. They detect, particulate matter, CO2, et cetera, but they don't do anything. They're a sensor. So what if you were able to combine the output of those other sensors? So like lighting control itself can be an occupancy sensor because it detects when somebody walks in the room. You can get how many times the people trigger that sensor. That can provide a data source that can then drive your HVAC. Same thing with air quality sensors. You have an outdoor air quality sensor, indoor air quality sensor. Outdoor air quality sensor is really important in places that have a high risk of like fire and outside particulate matter affecting the health of your air coming into the building. And then of course, indoor air quality environment is incredibly important, especially in this day and age. There's been numerous studies done where they've detected that particulate matter can be a predictor to infectious control, airborne infectious control processes that are going to be necessary in order to be able to control that risk. So now, once you combine all this and you provide these outputs, you are now building upon multiple systems to create direct responsive air control. And both Brad and Eric have talked about, what are the use cases? What are your goals? These types of systems then drive and satisfy multiple areas by adding one system and adding the output to a particular system, thereby creating one cohesive system. You've now satisfied things across the board: infectious control, better air quality, facilities, proactive operations and proactive maintenance cycles, and the administration, reduced energy consumption, and being able to provide additional sources, additional data sources, right? So they could also leverage the occupancy sensors from the lighting control to drive up. You know, the hospitals are based on census. I started my career basically growing up being a valet at a hospital and then going to work at various capacities throughout the hospital until I fell into the IT services in my early 20s. And I got to learn and understand. So like IT is one of the services that enable healthcare, right? So I very much early on learned to listen to the people that were providing the healthcare and also the people that were getting the healthcare provided too. Those are the two main components that make healthcare work, right? On the operational side of things, I had to work around and continually deliver my service so I did not impact that. Or if I did, I had to try to minimize the quality of that impact. So a lot of that goes into when you're building out solutions, trying to figure out how to get the most of your investment. Dollars only go so far. And if we go to my next slide here real quick, what we want to do is focus on making data relational. And I love this slide picture that Eric had up earlier in terms of the location-based services. Early on in the healthcare world, some healthcare is kind of funny. They're either really early bleeding edge adopters of technology and things, or they stay old school for as long as they can. I know that from my own experience in the healthcare environment I worked at, it was local here. We had one hospital, then we merged with other hospitals to have 9 in the area with 181 offsites. And then we went from that state to 28 states. And my career kind of elevated with that. So I got to experience what healthcare looked like in the many forms across the country and how it was delivered and what was really important to some of the locales. So I got a really good macro view of what healthcare, providing healthcare looked like. And one of the biggest things was, understanding where devices were. My favorite were the infusion pump stories. And I heard this countless times. If I could only tell where my infusion pumps were, I wouldn't have to order so many. And then all of a sudden they order a bunch, they come in and they find 10 of them in a closet, right? Because they didn't know they were there. So I was part of the network infrastructure group. And one of the early things that the technology that came out was wireless tagging, right? Being able to find location-based assets. And the granularity, because of the technology that was there, was decent, but it wasn't providing the level that would satisfy the average healthcare client without stipulating some design change rules, right? So you had to line up your wireless access points in a straight line down the hallway. You weren't allowed to put them in patient rooms in majority of the cases. That design criteria eventually evolved to where you could. And the reason that's important is for triangulation for location-based services. I want to have at least 3 points and somewhere in there based on the radio waves, I can tell where a device is down to a pretty granular level. So as those stipulations and those design considerations change, then that relational data coming from the location-based services became much more feasible to obtain with a lot of the investment in the foundational infrastructure that healthcare was already investing in. And what I love about this slide is that while you're putting in location-based services for one idea, like maybe that asset management thing, what you're really doing is you're enabling all of these other features and all of these other things, right? So and maybe that was unintentional, maybe it was intentionally planned. I love being and doing what I'm doing because it allows me to be intentional, to be able to be innovative and to say, what if we were to combine these different things? Because I understand where data comes from. All of these systems that have some type of computational power produce data. It used to be about control, and it has since transitioned into producing and recognizing that there's data being produced by these. And they come from geographical sources, statistical sources like the occupancy sensor, how many times was it triggered, right? Financial, and then even natural sources of data, just by observation and being able to provide that input. In my career, I was part of a nurse time motion study, and that was rather interesting. We did it at several hospitals within the healthcare environment, and I was there really to provide the connectivity for the study. But what I learned was absolutely fascinating. It was getting a handle on how the healthcare provider actually performs their job and to look for ways to either change process or leverage technology or both to make it more efficient so that they weren't wasting time doing things that were necessary but didn't fall under their purview from their operational aspect. And I thought that was absolutely fascinating. And that's something that I've always taken with me throughout the remainder of my career is trying to figure out, it's not technology for technology's sake, but it's using a combination of methods to make us more efficient, so that you're not doing something, you're not spending time, it takes you away from your primary function. And the primary function of a healthcare provider is the patient, right? So if we go to the next slide here real quick. What I really talk about is focusing on your outcomes. So while you set your goals, the areas of focus should include what type of data is being produced, who's using it and who's the benefit of it, what it's going to impact in your environment, and then how it impacts services. So in my example about occupancy sensor, and I keep harping on that because, like I said, census drives healthcare. You can get an understanding of who's in your waiting room and how long they're there, right? That tells you operationally, okay, I need to change the focus or change the way that I'm doing things in terms of providing that service to the customer, because we're always full. Well, why are we always full? Is it because of a certain demographic, because of certain services we provide in the area? Am I not providing enough of the services? You know, if you take a look at the census data in the surrounding area around the hospital, you notice that the population growth is growing a little bit older, and therefore the services that they're going to be looking for are changing. So maybe you want to be able to focus on doing a new development and offering new services within your healthcare environment that you didn't have before. And then how do you transition that? So really, the whole thing is all about life cycle management. If you life cycle your strategy and map that to technology, and then life cycle your technology, but keep some very high level goals all the way across the board, that's how you become successful. And that's how healthcare is able to stay innovative, because technology changes all the time. But there are some foundational approaches that enable all of these functions. Communications is number one, right? All of these things have to talk. I distinctly remember not too long ago, you could tell probably by the weight in my beard, that I remember when cell phones were prohibitato, and you know, they interfered with equipment. Nobody was really sure what to do with them. You couldn't use them in a hospital environment. Now it's understood a little bit more. They do proper construction shielding on the walls to equipment that's sensitive, so you're not providing outside influence or outside interference. They use different frequencies. So if we start to take a look at providing indoor cellular services, and now that those cellular services are starting to ramp up their bandwidth capabilities, and eventually it might do away with Wi-Fi. And you'd be able to leverage other sensors and other pieces of equipment to be able to provide those types of services. So it's that evolution of the technology leveraging something that's foundational that hasn't really changed. Wi-Fi in and of itself has always been a wireless access point and a wireless device. The difference is the change in the technology and the chipsets that go into those things, but the relationship is there. So for me, the foundational strategy would be provide some type of wireless access, put in some type of infrastructure that can be leveraged by these, so that as these change, all I need to do is change this one thing, and basically it makes it plug and play. And it's less hard, if you will, to plan for budgeting of those issues. But as long as you take this holistic view on your outcomes, and understand what can be leveraged to provide what other services in the future, you can tie it all together, and it's really pretty effective. And that's what we're starting to see as a big change in the healthcare environment right now. And that applies to smaller entities all the way across multiple entities with, you know, large healthcare portfolios. It's all about getting the data and getting that intelligence to empower the human to make the right decisions.
Awesome. So we're getting close to wrapping up here, and we'll roll into Q&A and discussion next. We just wanted to leave you with some closing remarks. So, you know, it's very important to think about teamwork and, you know, work with your partner. One of the things that really helps with that, the partnership, and this is between the client and the design team and the construction team. On the client side, the IT/OT partnership is something that's really important. You know, sometimes facilities and IT will mix together like oil and water, and it's really going to be challenging to try and find ways to be able to get them to come together and collaborate the way you really need to make something like this happen. Where I've seen great success with some of our clients is people who are putting somebody from IT over in the facilities department, or somebody in facilities who's strongly technology influenced being put into the IT department, and now they're able to help communicate in the same language that the other department needs. They have insights, and it's really strong, when we're able to work with people like that, we see that that is a great formula for success. And then, we kind of emphasize this early engagement. So making sure that you're budgeting for innovation, having somebody there who's able to champion, say, yes, we're going to keep this in the project because this is something we really value. It's not the facilities person with the flip phone who's going to say, we've got to make this stuff move to the next level. It's going to be somebody at a leadership level who really has that vision. Like I said, we make sure that we're communicating, making sure that those last responsible moments are really clearly defined, and that everybody on the construction team, design team, owner team understands why and what it is that's driving the critical path. And it's important to make sure that as you're working together, you take some time out and recognize some of the milestones and accomplishments that you're making together, because a lot of these things we're doing that are new and challenging, they're exciting. So let's celebrate that shared success. Mike, Eric, anything else you want to add from your perspectives?
No, I think, let me go here. I think, Brad, you really expressed it quite well. And I think, from my standpoint as the end customer for the engagement we had, I think the comments are particularly relevant about communication. I think it's also important to have consensus. And I think an understanding as part of that collaboration as it pertains to, what that sort of give and take is. So it's, great to say we need this and we need it by this point, but we also have to be reflective of the time investment necessary from all the parties in terms of what that makes, and vice versa. So, I think, and that was one of the things that worked out exceptionally well: the professionalism, the dedication, the thought leadership, and the interchange of ideas. Even, are you sure you want this? How does that affect your different stakeholders? That really paid huge dividends in terms of bringing a project very successfully to closure.
Yeah, I think if I were to add one more thing, it's to further expound upon the socialization, right, of what the plan is. You have to be able to communicate the value in the context. And each stakeholder, each person that's participating in the project needs to understand their role, but they need to understand the big picture too, right? Like, and understand this is why what you're doing is so important, because there are so many people involved, as you had on your previous slide. Having everybody understand this is what we're working towards, this is what we're driving for, and this is your role, this is your piece, and this is how important your piece is. Because I see that all the time in a lot of projects. There's a bit of a disconnect with people that say, okay, I'm given this, but I don't understand, right? They're given a couple pieces of the puzzle to put together, and then they hand it off to somebody else. But in relation to this, that successful bringing to the table, because these things are going to get more and more complicated because they're getting more and more integrated, and they have all these different dependencies, someone needs to have that, to keep that vision, right? One needs to have their eye on the big prize there.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And I see we'll get the spelling of our website updated for the next time we present this slide, but I'm going to kill the share right now and open up for some discussion. The way we wanted to do discussion was kind of Q&A for the panel. So if you got questions, please unmute yourself, take a swing at your question, and then we'll kind of give our input. But we'll also want to be able to have other folks who are on the call here be able to share all your knowledge with us as well. So who is feeling brave and would like to go first?
I'll start. I threw a question out in the chat, but maybe just a good place to start is like, what does define intelligent healthcare or an intelligent healthcare facility? Do I have to pick who that answer goes to or who the question goes to?
I can, yeah. So let me start there. I think, really from a provider's let me answer from a provider's perspective in the context of staff, the clinicians, physicians, and patients. So, I think it means, Brad brought up a good point, different personas. So intelligent hospital, at the end of the day, it's you want seamless movement so that people patients, physicians, they're coming together like this. So you want to have a design philosophy and use technology judiciously to accomplish that. People aren't going to the hospital to see an intelligent hospital per se. What they do want to know is when they go there, BYOD, can they use these devices? Can I seamlessly and easily and simply bring my family to be part of an encounter if I'm an inpatient? And we saw this during COVID-19, where patients wanted to reach out to loved ones, and it was complicated because we didn't have that intelligence there to make that easy. On top of it, nurses are not IT people per se, so we don't want to take them away. So intelligent hospital really is about putting technology to work to solve these problems and to doing it in a way that is transformative and is reducing that cost burden. So we're investing money, but we're trying to drive outcomes. And I think Michael really hit that right on the nail. What are those business outcomes that intelligence, brings?
Yeah, Mike, I thought, as you're kind of saying, it's a focus on data, right? And how you make that data actionable in whatever way that is, whether that's automating things to be able to save time and make people's tasks easier, whether that's delivering better experiences and better value for the people who are having to interact with those different systems. It's contributing to the bottom line, right? This stuff should end up being something that helps to save some money rather than being seen as a cost center, and making the building more sustainable. So automating, energy savings, operation savings, these are all things that should be going in there with the other goal of reduce the friction, for anybody who's having to use these things, and provide a better experience. Didn't talk a lot about why do you want to put that smart patient room into your hospital? Well, think about, you give up so much control when you're going into the hospital that you want to be able to give a little bit more control back to the patient, and that little touches like that all start to accumulate to become great satisfiers that help to improve that overall experience.
Yeah, because there's a number of healthcare entities, right? A lot of people are providing healthcare. Well, the key differentiator is, why do I want to come here? I know I'm out of the Detroit area in Michigan, and we've got about 4 providers here in our area. What makes me pick this particular health system to go to? Those little tiny touches are the keys. I had stomach surgery years ago, and I remember waking up, I was so perturbed, I had to get my blood drawn, every so many hours. No one told me that. But honestly, if I had an app that laid out my care schedule ahead of time and communicated that to me, I would have been, well, let's face it, folks, staying in a hospital, it's not a hotel, right? Nobody wants to book a stay there. So if you do increase that patient experience just by those little touches, and if technology can bring that, I think if you were to do certain things that provide that data, that provide that intelligence for you to be able to act on, you would see that, right? You'd be able to see that this is the type of thing that's going to drive census up for healthcare in my building or in my healthcare facility. And data for data's sake is the worst thing in the world. Data for data's sake is a mess, right? So keep that in mind too. So as we look to tie these systems together, if you're making that investment, make sure that you've got a data strategy, right? So that you're collecting only the data that you need. I hear it time and time again, both in commercial, corporate, real estate, where I've got too much data, right? I don't know what to do with it now because I've inundated myself with data. And in fact, I've said data like 80 times. I don't even want to hear it anymore. But if you can prioritize how you're collecting it, it makes it twice as effective, because you're not going and spending resources going back and cleaning it up, right? It's that whole thing, measure twice, cut once concept that goes to deploying any type of solution.
Yeah, imparting knowledge, to your point, Michael, from the data. So, we talked about sensors, so IoT in healthcare. And so a great example, another one of intelligent hospital is, facility automation for supply services. One of the biggest problems is over ordering of supplies, particularly for washrooms. So if you could use IoT, and I actually did a study on this. We found we were over ordering by not 1 or 2%, by tens of percents. And so, by being able to, to Michael's point, have that information and knowledge from the data using the connectivity backbone and the IoT, that is huge. And that translates into, like you talk about an OKR, that translates into, for a COO and a CFO, a bottom line number. And it's that kind of difference that makes, and where it comes back to Brad, is then, okay, so what are the implications as far as the plumbing of the facility, if you will, use a colloquial term, is it, wireless impacts, networking impacts, data cabling impacts, all that ancillary, all that stuff matters. And that's where, back to a data plan that both Brad and Michael were talking about, I want to extend that. You can actually, you have to have a strategic plan, what your intentions are. And that's where HGA was extremely helpful to us in getting us to think through what it is we were trying to do and the implications of what we were trying to do, and therefore down to the costs, so we could plan accordingly.
Thank you, Eric. The check is in the mail. But kind of feeding off your point about supply chain, right? So as we were talking through, we're going to enable this patient experience of giving them more control over their space. Well, now things like that code blue automation becomes low-hanging fruit. And there was not necessarily a huge consensus on, oh my gosh, that's going to revolutionize everything we're doing, but it's easy enough to do a little bit of programming. Yeah, we'll throw it in because it's that easy. And then as we co-create these solutions with the that whole group of stakeholders, what we heard from the nursing staff was, where we really end up falling down, it's inventorying the supplies that were used during that code blue event, and then being able to tie that in with billing the patient. So, not all the solutions are things we're going to put in our specs and they're going to go into the building. Some of these things are items that went on this roadmap. We delivered a report and said, here's how you can do some of the objectives that we talked about. And for that, it would be, you guys are building some of that technology into your medical record system, being able to, scan QR codes and be able to automate more of this process that had been pencil and paper before. So as we're talking through these things, that we're not always going to solve them through the technologies that are part of the construction process, but we were able to help give some guidance to the end user on things they could be thinking about a little more globally to try and help streamline some of their processes.
Yeah, and to your point there, while you're not solving that particular issue, what you are doing is enabling the solution for the future solve, right? So during the construction process, you're saying, you know what, have you thought about putting in some type of robust wireless coverage to enable wireless sensors, right? You might not need data drops everywhere, but you need wireless of some capacity, whether it's the ability to plug in a LoRaWAN device, which is, a lot of devices are going down towards the LoRaWAN port, utilizing that type of wireless connectivity as opposed to Wi-Fi. And so having the ability to plan out, knowing that you're going to have that future adoption while you're doing the construction, and it brings up another interesting point. You head up there, the average construction period is 18 to 24 months, right? So when I talk, somebody keeping a holistic view of what's going on, it's incorporating that IT/OT piece, right? So you got the construction coming in. IT is planning another refresh. Now, whether or not they utilize a converged network, right, which is a single physical infrastructure for all the different technology, whether it's IT or OT, or their policy is putting in its own network, which is still managed by the IT group, there is a certain level of change that someone needs to keep track of. And the construction process is bid out or spec 2 years previously. A lot can change in 2 years, and a lot can change right as you go through to buy. So what we recommend to our clients is, let's have another review of where everything is. Let's take a look at the submittals. Let's make sure that it's in alignment with all of these other initiatives. It sounds complicated, but it's actually relatively easy to do because there's a very simple method that you use to go through and justify what should be included for consideration, right? So you can't say, well, in 4 years, I'm thinking about doing this thing, and that's going to change the way I'm doing business now with these other things here. But what you can do is make a minor modification potentially to the construction project to accommodate that. There is some things that you can control and some things that, but the effort has to be made.
Well, how do you look forward in your crystal ball? Eric, you talked about edge computing. We're in the age of Web 3.0, and that's immediate. And if the hospitals aren't planning Web 3.0, then all of the things that Eric is talking about is really going to be in catch-up mode when it could be
Yeah.
planned.
Yeah, it's a great question. I love this question because when you look at, I'll put it under the header of digital transformation. At healthcare systems, it's still largely clinically led in terms of it has to be clinically relevant, what they do. At the end of the day, they're in the business of providing care, which Michael said. So when we look at how do we act as, from an IT perspective, as stewards of technology, it's incumbent upon the CTO, the CIO, an innovation office to look at what are those set of technologies, back to my earlier point, and where they can make an impact. So what that means is very often looking to other industries and seeing what's worked, what hasn't worked, and then making an assessment, is this something that can have value in healthcare? A great example is experiential technology. So originally for gaming, the entertainment industry, the VR goggles and so forth, it's now becoming very mainstream in healthcare as it pertains to distraction therapy, medication reduction, reducing anxiety in children, put on the goggles and being immersive. And so there's been even a lot of clinical studies. There was one at a New York area hospital that showed a 26% reduction in opioid prescription requirements using this tech. Now, what does this mean? Back to your question, does the hospital facility have the networking bandwidth to support this, the low latency, high performance, that sort of stuff? What about connectivity means? Obviously, it's going to be wireless. What does that look like? But an unspoken area that's particularly important now is security and cybersecurity. And so on the cybersecurity front, healthcare is the #1 targeted industry in the United States for cyber attacks. And there's, because of the nature of HIPAA, civil and criminal penalties for breaches, hospital systems will pay. And there's been some very notable examples in the last 2 years, including a big system on the West Coast that lost service and diminished care or potentially lost life. There was one hospital system in the Atlanta area that's being sued where the alleged plaintiff or the plaintiffs are alleging that because they didn't take adequate precautions, a life was lost. So when we look at these technologies, we have to look at the broader picture. And Michael, I think you touched on that. What are the dependencies? What are the limitations? And how do we introduce it in a way where we don't increase risk? Or if we are, we understand, we quantify what that risk looks like, and we address that through the different stakeholders. So technology is always going to change. You mentioned Web 3.0. There's quantum networking. The quantum internet, which is still in its very early stages. China is very well advanced in that technology. It has massive implications in terms of what it can do. What does that look like for a hospital system? Are they, have they built Wi-Fi, for instance, as a way to enable that type of technology? So those are the sort of questions that an IT department in particular has that responsibility to bring forward to leadership.
Yeah, and innovative things like edge compute, data has weight, right? So it costs a lot of money to send it to the cloud. It can, depending on how much information and how big you are and what you're doing. So, and it also costs resources. It costs dollars to spend on the resources to manipulate that data once it's in the cloud. So that is what we're starting to see across the real estate industry, is that edge compute and bringing some of that back. Let's process some of it here. Let's disseminate what's important, and then maybe send that off for analysis in the cloud or whatever other application is hosted in the cloud services there. Because the other part of it too is risk, right? Who owns the data? What kind of data are you collecting? That goes back to the governance strategy, right? Is understanding does it have PII, is it personally identifiable information? I put in utilization sensors to be able to measure how many people are coming in and out of the bathroom, right? Just so I can have good restroom data. What I didn't realize was that utilization sensor was camera based. And so now it's actually taking pictures of people and analyzing that as my data tick rather than just like LiDAR or something like that has implications on how you manage that solution, where it should live, how you should use the data moving forward with that. And it reminds me of when digital radiology first started to come into healthcare. That was an interesting time because we got a request in our group for a couple of ports to hook up some equipment. So we provisioned them some ports on our special technology VLAN that we had created, so a segment of the network. And they're like, yeah, it's not working. We're not able to do anything. We're not able to do any scans. And then I went down and actually investigated what was going on. And it was digital radiology, which is not putting images on the film anymore. It's transmitting and taking raw pictures at gigs and gigs and gigs and gigs a second and transmitting it to a server somewhere else in the hospital. And so our backbone network was in no way, shape, or form able to compete with that. Those are the types of disconnects that you want to try to avoid when you're looking at these. And you're right, to Eric's point, it does take someone to be aware of these initiatives on the IT side to be able to facilitate. That's why I mentioned before, IT as a services organization. They are in the back end, right? Just like the folks that maintain the parking lot and clean the restrooms and everything else. IT is a service organization that enables the functionality of the primary function, which is providing healthcare service to the patient.
Such insightful responses. I have nothing to add to that. Anybody else have anything you want to add to that? I know we're getting close to our published end time right now, so we could either wrap up or we could take some more questions. So
apparently our presentation was that complete that it just, that leaves nothing else to cover. Right?
I'm a talkative bunch. I'm not going to start calling on people, but if you got anything you need, like to try and get out, now's your chance.
Well, hopefully everybody was able to find good value in the session. I see a couple of kudos in the chat, so I think it went pretty well. Appreciate the input and the insights from everybody.
Yeah, likewise.
Eric, do you have an idea on how many hospitals have a smart room like you described?
So I can't give you a percentage. What I can say is that it's something that's growing very much in terms of the implementations. So if you look across the nation, actually, and it's not just a North American thing, but the growing awareness of we need to get our arms around how to manage different devices, the wearables, and creating a better patient experience, but reducing nursing satisfaction. So right now, I think at record levels is clinician burnout. I think Brad touched on it. A lot of nurses leaving the profession because of just the overwhelming impact of all this. And you layer on this being, COVID and other, situations, layer on the technology factors onto that as well, because technology is increasing in terms of its complexity. And it creates a natural tension. And so bringing it all together through a call system, a patient education entertainment system is a great way to sort of get control back. And so it's not uncommon now to hear about, they call it integration efforts, but I think it's more than that, about being able to have things like location services where presence, who's this person who just came in my room, being able to have that displayed on a digital whiteboard, the footboard of the patient sees who it is, sees what the role of the person is, their schedule. There may be do not disturb features, virtual knock, if you will. Maybe the patient wants to sleep and it's not critical. So instead of doing virtual rounding where you disturb the patient, you could do these types of features. So there's a lot of interest in this now to, again, reduce burden on nursing, improve outcomes, reducing length of stay as a measure, improve that patient experience, get the HCAP scores up. And so there's a financial and I'll say a professional incentive for organizations to bring it together. But back to your original question, it seems to be very much a growing area of importance. And I think it's going to continue to grow, particularly as more and more wireless devices take place in an inpatient setting, and it becomes an imperative.
You know, what I'm seeing is, Jim, it's the competitive advantage, right? That's one of the reasons why people implement this kind of technology. So we've got some of the early adopters who are starting to prove out those use cases of being able to give you that control. And now the healthcare system down the street sees that and doesn't want to get lapped. They want to make sure that they're keeping up with the latest and greatest. So I guess I'm not sure either, you know, what percentage there are, but I think we're seeing so much demand for this that I think we're starting to move from that early adopter stage into the fast followers now.
Yeah, and the concepts are there, and the technology, I think, is maturing to the point to deliver what the concept was promising. You know, that's another key piece too.
Usually there's some pressure from an insurance company that says, I want you to do it because it reduces costs.
Yeah, you put all that control at the
Going to
bedside.
urgent care facilities.
Yeah. I mean, Jim, one of the things to consider too is, you know, I touched on a measure, performance measures, but, you know, it could be, for instance, infection control. It could be, again, reducing length of stay. It could be reducing, you know, medical errors of commission or omission, you know, things like that. So your point is very well taken. And so at the end of the day, you can really reduce it down to how do we make care simple and easy for both patient and the care team, if you will. And so I think Michael and Brad both hit on this change management, how you get adoption. The technology in some ways is the least of the issue. It's how you bring along those stakeholders in healthcare and to make them understand what it is you're doing, why you're draining the proverbial swamp, and what it means to them. And if you can answer those questions, and I went through this with Brad and the HGA team, and it took some time, but we did it. That's when we got people aligned on those priorities, and that's when we got the proverbial train moving out of the station.
Eric, I'd say that one part of it, right? Certainly not the whole thing, but having that pilot space that people could come in there and actually experience and start to wrap their head around what are some of these concepts that might be a little bit more conceptual, that how does it actually look like when we're actually in here, be able to give that feedback. You know, people buy into what they're able to build. So being able to see it and give that feedback really helps. So that's one little component of the change management there. And Jim, to your point about risk and insurance, that I don't know that they're going to get any money off of their premiums for it, but it is a fall management strategy to be putting all of this control over at the bedside rather than being able to have a couple buttons and the rest of them you got to get up and walk over the wall to be able to switch. So we'd still keep that stuff at the wall. That's the strategy I've adopted for my smart home. I've got smart lights, I've got smart switches, I got smart outlets. And the smart lights, I'm the only person that gets to control that because I'm the only one who knows what the remote control looks like on my phone. But the smart switches, anybody can walk up here, operate just like it's a normal switch, and be able to, I can still automate it, I can still have my remote control of it. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. So I don't necessarily advocate for this technology to supplant the current ways of doing things. It's there to be able to expand on what's already there. So you can kind of get those people who are not going to be the early adopters. You know, healthcare, you're dealing with an aging population in a lot of cases. So you don't want to alienate them or make it more difficult for them or for the nursing staff who's got to all of a sudden play IT support. We really wanted to put things in that are very intuitive, but just kind of pushing the capabilities of that experience.
It's all changing fast, I can promise you that. I went to the HIM show and it's amazing what's going on there. So
Well, on that note, should we wrap up? We got a number of people signing off and saying their thank yous. Brad popped a nice example from Penn Medical and the Schneiders. We were looking at the healthcare patient room, so be sure to stop in the chat and check that out before we go. Ben, you want to wrap us up? Any last words for us?
Sure. Anyone can chime in if I missed any other chapter updates, other events happening beyond the ones I mentioned. I was just updating the website with Austin's, and I noticed that they're looking at Dallas, or what's it, another expansion Zach is questioning, doing some surveys on LinkedIn about other areas, but I guess anyone who's on the call, if there isn't a big chapter forming that you're aware of, please reach out if you have interest. Ben Disney is chapter liaison for that. You can find information under chapters at the site, and I'll encourage you to go to the website and join as a member if you would, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.
Hey, Ben, is there any activity going on in San Diego?
Brad, do you
Potentially.
know the status of San
Potentially.
Diego?
Yeah, San Diego, Southern California, we do have a potential leader down there. So if you want to shoot your interest in being a part of that group to the info@buildingintelligencegroup.org email address, we'll get you put on a list. And so I can't tell you when that's going to get started up, but yeah, there will be something. I think before we started recording, Brad Bonfiglio said that Jimmy Dunn is working on getting a chapter set up in St. Louis. So they are going to be having their first kind of steering committee. It's that core group of folks who help to figure out where you're going to meet and what the topics are going to be, and start getting their network energized and invited to some of the meetings. So hopefully we'll get that St. Louis chapter spun up here pretty quick as well. So David Katz in here earlier. I'm not sure if he's still on, but he's been working on getting something set up in Toronto. I believe we got a few Canadian chapters that we're looking to pop up too. So it's all just a matter of getting everybody to have the time to be able to get everyone together. So, you know, it may be slow going, slower than we were hoping to. The pandemic certainly derailed all that momentum that we had, and it's all starting to come back here. So we'll get there.
Do you have a member in Canada?
We've got Toronto, Vancouver, and Halifax, I believe, is where people are looking to get them set up. I think that they're still working on getting that steering committee put together and actually getting something off the ground, but it looks like we're going there.
That's good.
All right, I'm going to push stop on the recording here. I'll keep this open if